Dr. Diane Jones Allen, Doctor of Engineering, FASLA, is Program Director and Professor of Landscape Architecture at the University of Texas Arlington. She is Principal Landscape Architect with DesignJones LLC, which received the American Society of Landscape Architects Community Service Award. In 2017, she participated on the ASLA Blue Ribbon Panel on Climate Change. Diane serves on the Landscape Architecture Foundation as the Vice President of Education. She is author of Lost in the Transit Desert, Race, Transit Access, and Suburban Forum, Routledge Press 2017, and co-editor of Design as Democracy, Techniques for Collective Creativity, Island Press 2017. Dr. Austin Allen's background in landscape architecture and documentary film focuses upon recovery projects in New Orleans and documenting cultural landscapes with works including Claiming Open Spaces. He is part of the award-winning landscape architectural firm DesignJones LLC with Diane Jones Allen, and they are recipients of the 2016 ASLA Community Service Award. Allen is also an associate professor of practice in the School of Architecture at the University of Texas Arlington. He received the Distinguished Alumni Award in March 2017 from the College of Environmental Design at the University of California Berkeley, and is a board member of BlackLAN, the Black Landscape Architects Network. And today they'll be presenting their talk titled Landscape, Reclaiming Sustainability and Resilience. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Diane Jones Allen and Dr. Austin Allen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So I'll go ahead and share the screen. Do you want to say something, Austin, or you want me to share the screen? I will share the screen.
All right. I am so happy to be here, and every time we get invited or have been invited to LaBash, I really feel a very special opportunity and a very special occasion. And I felt that last night, got to present a documentary last night, and great questions and reactions. The thing about LaBash that I love is that it came from students, and it came from a time period about 50 years ago. And when people have asked me about this time and the changes that have happened with students in the last year, and it's ongoing, what does it remind me of in terms of the history? It reminds me of about 50 years ago when LaBash was formed. And that energy helped to really get us to think about what do we want to talk about today? And it is about landscape, reclaiming sustainability and resilience, to reclaim the moment in terms of the beauty of a profession that we've both been involved in for years, and that we see students moving ahead in such interesting ways right now, and a field and discipline that is doing the same in that kind of way. And in that, that photo you saw, real quickly, just want to say that's from Houston, Texas, 2017, August 28 to 2017. And it is a photo of a group of people walking across the street from North Brestwood Boulevard. And they are in the middle of Hurricane Harvey's storm and knew that a few days more that storm would continue. But the resilience you see in that picture of we know how to navigate this becomes an important part of our dialogue, our discourse as landscape architects, to know the survivability, the sustainability that happens in these situations. Landscape architecture has been the most, or one of the most viable ways to positively shape place and give vulnerable populations not only a voice, but a tool for strengthening and sustaining the communities in which they live. And that doesn't mean we've always lived up to it, but we have the viability to do it, and that's what's been exciting to us. In the picture there, it was a picture of the Hayden Plaza, and the fact that this kind of gathering space needed the energy of landscape architects tied to something that the community was doing anyway to take it to that next level. And that's that kind of statement of viable way to positively shape and place and give vulnerable populations a voice. Landscape architecture should remain focused on facing the challenges necessary for sustaining community and healing the landscape. Much of this work addresses the forces that cause harm. And that's such a critical part, is for us to head on, not be fearful or dismiss the idea that we must address the forces that cause the harms that we face today, whether it's through climate change or other things that happen in the Anthropocene era of shaping the globe. The skill set, critical thinking, and abilities to lead the way, address the social, cultural, and economic issues of our time are the core values of landscape architecture, and we must embrace them anew.
So following that is, how are some of the ways that we do that? So one way that we do that is by using community knowledge. And a good example is the devastation of our coastal communities that come from both man-made and natural forces. So this is the Bayou Bienvenue wetland triangle, which leads to the central wetland in coastal Louisiana. And as you can see, the stumps, this was a full cypress swamp that now is, depleted cypress forest, which is subject to storm surge. And I'll let you just fly over it. It's beautiful in kind of a sad way, but it is something that definitely needs mitigation and rethinking. And as I said, again, the wound here is the loss of wetlands. So as you could see the map on your left, that was New Orleans, 1798, and it's set within a cypress swamp. And of course, on your right, I think this is like a 2019 Google, pretty close to our current time. And as you could see, the city, where that same area is, where that camera is, that's the French Quarter. The city has expanded, and there's only this one piece basically left of wetlands that leads into the central wetlands. So because of development and the building of infrastructure, the wetlands has greatly depleted, leaving the city vulnerable. So how do we use indigenous and local knowledge? So I've been looking at the maroon landscape because these wetlands, and especially at the time of the first photo, were filled with, not filled, but there were many colonies, populations of maroons who were escaped slaves who lived within those wetlands for protection. And they had various relationships with the city. And, some of them were kind of borderland communities and some of them were totally immersed. So they had a particular indigenous knowledge about how do you live and protect the wetlands because it gave them cover. And so how do you use that indigenous knowledge? And as I just said, this is a really old map that shows some of those communities. So there are current projects that are going on in New Orleans by others who are working on using that maroon knowledge. And then there are certain, these tenets that come out of that, a certain way of being, kind of a communal and restorative way of life, and foremost, protecting the wetlands and the ecosystem. And so again, to local knowledge, this is John Taylor, who I consider a present day maroon. And whenever you're working in any community, there are the citizen scientists, there are the people that live in the community. John Taylor, we connected to him because he remembers when that cypress forest I showed you was actually a cypress forest. As a kid, he would go there and play and fish and catch turtles and alligators. And so he continues to, try to understand and combat the things that are happening. But he's a really good example of how when you come into a community, you find those people that have the knowledge, which is key to fostering stewardship and understanding place. And these photos were taken by John Taylor. Well, all except for the water moccasin. I took that one. But just understanding, you know, the wildlife. And that's the great thing about citizen scientist people. They live with this stuff every day, right? So he knows all the plants and animals and has a very close relationship because he lives like a few blocks from this wetland and actually used to live right next to it when he was a child. So one of the ways man-made infrastructure factors into this is the Mississippi Gulf Outlet. And basically what happened in Katrina simply is that the Katrina itself had winds and some, you know, there was some destruction, but not a lot. It went out over the Gulf, it got warm and the surge came. And two things happened. It went up this channel, right? Because this channel was built so that ships could go from the Gulf to the Mississippi River. And the digging of the channel caused saltwater intrusion, which caused the depletion of those wetlands. And there was many other things that happened historically, you know, way back from the time of Maroons. There was cutting of cypress and other channels and canals dug, but this was a big one. And actually the community fought with Mr. Go to stop, to close this channel, but it was post-Katrina. And that's what happened in Katrina. This storm went up this channel and it went two ways. It went down toward the lower Ninth Ward and then it went up the London Avenue canal toward Gentilly. And so post-Katrina, you know, and many, like I said, there have been many people doing this work. You know, the city began to realize we have to learn how we live with water, right? That these flood walls, because when the water came through that channel, it broke the flood wall. The flood wall is at the top of the levee. It broke the flood wall in many places, London Avenue Canal, and also along the lower Ninth Ward, where Brad Pitt did his Make It Right houses. It broke right there. And that's where you got all in other places. And that's why you got flooding in New Orleans because of a failure of infrastructure, but by a failure of understanding how this infrastructure, this other infrastructure would impact the natural wetlands, the natural infrastructure, and how that natural infrastructure could really mitigate and could have prevented that. So now there's thinking that, yes, we need to rethink that. And so that's what this is about, that it broke through this London Avenue Canal. So there's a project which started a few years back, which is still going on right now. 100 houses have been done, which is very exciting. And this project, the NORA Community Adaptation Project, is a way to use local knowledge in a way, as opposed usually, you know, communities depend on cities to build pumping stations and cities to build flood walls and to build levees. But what if you were able to give citizens a way to really participate and use their knowledge and put the mitigation into their hands? And that's what the NORACAP does. So as I say, it's a way for residents to learn the dynamics of water in their community, to share their knowledge, to actively participate, and to become stewards. And so what this project did, the pilot used the Gentilly because the flood wall broke there from the storm surge, as I said, and it would give $25,000 to each resident who lived in that blue area in Gentilly. And they thought they'd get like 100 people, but at this meeting they had 400 people because people really want to participate. And, you know, it's not just about getting the $25,000. It's about, oh, maybe I can have some control the next time it floods, the next time it rains, you know, I can, you know, learn and be somewhat responsible. Yes, have some power about what's happening here. And this was a session where the landscape architect, so we were one of the landscape architects, Dana Brown and others who participated in this kind of education session where we, you know, talk to community members who signed up for the $25,000 about, you know, what is the green stormwater infrastructure that can be used on your property, you know. And it was a back and forth because people know their property, they know where the water runs. We know things about GSI, and how do you have this kind of transactive thing and work together on this piece of land. This is basically like, just to show that there's a $25,000 budget, which had to be turnkey. The thing I like about this too is like, they're not just getting plans, they're actually getting the turnkey project. So it included design, construction, you know, all, you know, that was turnkey. And the good thing, the interesting thing about this is there are also many other projects that were happening where there was one big stormwater facility. So it's kind of like looking at now, it's kind of like the research after this is, if we had done one big stormwater facility, you know, would it have had greater impact than putting facilities on each of these properties? And that's the kind of, you know, looking at this holistically that's happened now. So this is just an example. These houses are really nice. People, you know, they were devastated in Katrina. A lot of these homes flooded, but through Road Home and other programs, they were able to rebuild their houses. And so now they're looking at, okay, it can happen again, or we get this, you know, increased rainfall all the time. How do we mitigate this? And so there are cottages that sit on single family lots, and you can see the before, you know, mostly concrete everywhere. And, you know, people still wanted their patios. So it's like, okay, so as you could see from that little flyer that I showed, or the pamphlet, like introducing them to permeable paving, and, you know, permeable pavers and other kind of permeable pavers, paving to like capture the water. And here's another one. And this one, you know, we used a lot of different things, as you could see, like there's so much paving, and then getting them to understand that, okay, you know, we could do rain gardens and we could do dry creeks and we can add planting. So we, you know, basically transform these spaces using their knowledge of where the water runs. They have to live with this. What are the things that they like? You know, getting them to understand, how do you take care of this? And they were really happy. I mean, after 1 or 2 got done, then more people wanted them. People that had signed up and still were skeptical, you know, when they saw it and when it rained, and then people could say, actually, my house didn't flood this time, right? And then this is another one, as you could see, where there's Austin talking to one of the residents after it's built. And, you know, it's like taking up people's lawns, which often for people, it's like, you're going to take up my lawn. But once they understood like the impact, and they could see it down and see the beauty. And like I said, we use a lot of different techniques. We use stormwater planters, rain, water collection, rain barrels and cisterns and dry creeks and rain gardens, all kinds of GSI. And the great thing about this too is, you know, so we could calculate how many gallons, how much impervious space, so that we can calculate that for the whole community and can compare if we did one facility somewhere to capture, as opposed to collecting it on each property. And we handed over this maintenance manual, which each person got, and which they actually signed. And so now it's in their hands, right? And so, you know, now they're responsible for like taking care of this. Because, you know, through the whole process, they were there through the design, the construction, they saw how it was built. I mean, because it's right on their property. And now they become, you know, they are kind of, you know, responsible. They now are stewards of protecting their whole community. And then this is just a stormwater compliance list. So I'll turn it back to you, Austin.
So I'm going to jump us ahead to Texas, from Louisiana to Texas. And in this, I take the beginning of a statement. Joppa is a state of Texas. And I'm playing on words. Obviously, Joppa is not a state of Texas. Texas is one of our states, except for when it says it's its own nation and its own whatever in terms of things. And here is the opportunity for reordering ideas around sustainability, resilience, Olmsted and Joppa in particular. And we're looking at a community that calls itself Joppa. It's listed sometimes as Joppa, not to be confused with another Joppa in Texas, but this one is part of Dallas. Was its own entity for a long time, and that's where we want to go to. That license plate, though, is from February 2021, and nobody was ready for what happened here in Texas in February 2021 when the temperatures got down almost to zero and we had snow and everybody got stopped in that process, and we wanted to see that as the way of thinking about climate change. Where I want to start though is with Olmsted, because, and before we start on it, I just wanted to say Olmsted, I have this whole other way that I think we should be getting to see him, particularly coming up on his 200th anniversary, which will be in the year 2022. And you can see that online with the Olmsted 200. This, I want to pull him back into Olmsted as he's thinking about things, particularly when he gets to Texas, but a little bit before. So just a video clip, a few minutes. Can we hear that audio? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if everybody's hearing the audio. Can we hold 1 second then? I think we have to go out again and click that little button on the.
Oh, they couldn't hear the audio?
Yeah, they can.
Could you all hear the audio? They couldn't? They could not?
No, we couldn't hear it.
Oh, okay. So let's see, that means I'm gonna have to unshare.
See, it's a little one to the left.
Okay. Now they can hear?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I keep having these dreams. I never dream about the place, but somehow Africans are always in the center.
One day we're gonna leave here.
I always dream about Africans.
One day
Was it dreams or was it nightmares?
we're gonna leave here.
I can't tell the difference.
If not today, maybe tomorrow.
It was in South Carolina, 1853.
All right. What I love about showing just this little bit of clip is it's repositioning Olmsted very quickly. And Kofi Boone talks a little bit about this South Carolina thing that happens. And Olmsted, when he travels to the South, spends a little bit more time in South Carolina because he sees something he hasn't seen, which is, of course, we understand, and Kofi has explained it, is the West African influences in the landscape in agriculture. And he is a person who understands agriculture, Olmsted is. When he gets to Texas, he really has begun to formulate a lot of landscape ideals about place. And that's what starts to be critical. So what you saw in that video clip was Buffalo, which was, they were celebrating Juneteenth, which is a national celebrated celebration that came out of Texas and places like Joppa, which we will get to, who originated the idea of Juneteenth. And that was in an Olmsted Park. That one person that I like to show in there in the video is a person who is now Mayor Brown in there. But let me jump ahead here to A Journey Through Texas, which was a book Olmsted wrote that actually shaped our profession as landscape architecture as much as Central Park shapes our profession as landscape architecture. And that's why I say it's the African dream. In there, he's looking at population, land, production, and he lays it out in the book. Those statistics are straight out of the book. It's him camping. And the next slide. And what he does on the next slide is he takes those next set of statistics and he compares slaves and bales of cotton, each county. And he counts the number of slaves that are registered there and the amount of cotton, so that he has this comparative growth pattern from 1850 to 1855 to analyze and think about. And next slide. The way he is thinking about this takes us ahead to something. And he actually takes the time to talk about runaway slaves, because what we understand is slavery has become the important part of wealth. Slaves are valued commodities within slavery. And so that they're running away not only impacts that loss of wealth, but that loss of production. And he begins to show it. And his comparative in the statistical rundown is what happens in 1848, which is that Texas gets a lot of people from the failed revolutions of Europe who come looking for something new. A lot of intellectuals, a lot of professionals, but a lot of everyday people, and they decide to do their own farming. And they do it without slaves, and they are very, very productive in the production of cotton up against a group of people who have decided that they no longer want to be slaves. And that's where you start to get the interesting thing towards a national landscape and a national consciousness that comes out of the Texas experience. And we do not talk enough in reference to that. Next slide. And thus we jump ahead to a place called Joppa, which is officially called Joppa, but by the community it's called Joppa with two E's at the end of there. What you see is an image of what really made Joppa Joppa, which is a gentleman named Hines who ran that ferry across the Trinity River. And it was a major crossing point because there weren't the bridges to get across in other places that actually created a lot of commerce things in Dallas. Hines was a former slave. His plantation owner had lent him out to run that enterprise. After the Civil War, he continued to run it. And he also set up one of the first freedmen's towns in Texas. And the freedmen's towns were former slaves setting up their own towns along a place that normally might flood, the Trinity River. But you have these numerous freedmen's towns that that are there. And we took a particular interest in Joppa and Joppi, and it's because many things have been happening there recently that are very much architecture, landscape architecture issues. We got involved because one of our colleagues was looking at something called the Melissa Pierce School. And if we can go through there, we can see some of the student things that began to do on this, enhancing community through living streets and open spaces. And we were looking at Joppa, this traditional community, small, but very powerful. That's some drone footage of it. And a closed elementary school that had become in ruins, often left kids. This is down. But anyway, it turned out that a former slave had in fact descended in slavery, had made the land available, set up an elementary school, the Melissa, which is now called the Melissa School, and gave us a project and an opportunity as a university to work with the neighborhood on new ways to revitalize. And Dr. Kate Holiday, who's a preservation, really did a lot. If we could go to the slide, show some of the students that we have been doing since 2020 to help the neighborhood think through its relationship to Habitat for Humanity, to the city of Dallas, and to others to make this a viable experience. And if we could on some of the additional slides. We go to the next slide. Yeah. And these are just some of the things that show where there was interaction with ideals of how to sustain housing growth, to not get caught up in gentrification, and how to in fact celebrate the place and everything that's going on with it. This is, yeah, we can go through these pretty quickly and I can spend a lot more time. This is the students working with the neighborhood, which it's critical. The engagement was a critical part of it. And it was a critical part of solving some immediate problems that they were having on stabilizing the neighborhood so that the traditions and parts of the neighborhood could be kept intact. Next slide. And that's what some of the architecture students began to look at in the fall, is how to revitalize the buildings and to modernize, yet not lose the content and control. Next. And work this out with conversations with the neighborhood in terms of a list of things that the neighborhood saw as priorities for revitalizing the space. And one of them was not necessarily to make that a school again, but to make it the center core of so much in the neighborhood. This spring, what I've been working with is a group of students, graduates in landscape architecture, looking at the water and the infrastructure of water that defines Joppa. There's a series of lakes that have been added on. You can see here, this is like farming and urban farming and some other initiatives. But if we go, this was all in the fall. And yes, here we go. And we're calling this the Honey Springs Branch Studio. Honey Springs Branch was where the water entity that came into the Trinity River. Joppa itself is about 6 miles from downtown Dallas. and has become such an important place because the Trinity River has become the front door as opposed to the back door or the throwaway place of town. Has become the front door. And so it has become real important for that community to keep hold of things. Next slide. And you can zoom in and you can see that's Joppa to the left there, the Trinity River to the right. And that area of land just in between becomes very important, how it's defined and reclaimed and repurposed for Joppa. And it's a series of lakes that have been created there. Those are that faded green lakes are what are there currently. The blue were there historically. And we're working with really ideals that reclaim this for the neighborhood in a way that they have a say on what happens with the water. The blue line that you see there is the divide that is and Springs branch. And that leads to another project that Diane talked about.
Okay, I thought you were going to talk about this, but so we actually applied for a SOM, Skidmore, Owens and Merrill research grant. They do like a competition every year to for research, and they look for interdisciplinary partnerships with communities, and they have a different topic. And this year was about urban issues of urban development tied to sustainability and equity and access. And so our project was to look at the historic Black settlements. Our project was called Reclaiming Black Settlements. So it was to look at the historic Black settlements along the Trinity River. There are several freedmen towns, and that are now under pressure because what often happens, Black communities were in the lowlands or the lands, where there was flooding, and now riverfront property is very desirable. And especially in Texas, there's a big park that's being developed and other kind of waterfront development happening. And so these towns are kind of in danger. So we're going to look at Joppa as a case study and develop a design playbook to help these communities deal with policy and design that could protect them, and community investment and retention of their property to help them deal with sprawl. And so that's a project, and it's we're going to do a studio this summer with students. There was an award, a grant that goes along with this. So we actually hope to actually be able to do something that the community can actually use, and that these communities, the other communities, can use as a guide. Do you want to say something about it, Austin?
Oh, no, I was just going to say that for us, it was just such a way of seeing how participation on the part of the neighborhood made this possible. And I can't overstate that. That is a critical part, I think, of what made this an attractive project. We've been able to do a number of engagements, whether it's been in person or during the pandemic, doing things online.
Yeah, the person with the Santa Claus hat is Shalandria, she runs the South Central Civic League, which is the neighborhood association. And so we're in a partnership. So it is very collaborative, and then it's cross-disciplinary because Austin and Kate are in the department in the School of Architecture, and I'm the program in landscape architecture, which makes it cross-disciplinary. And then in order to get this grant, you had to have a strong community partner. So it's the whole thing about not doing things to communities, but with them and letting them be the guide. And that's happened the whole way. Shalandra is very strong, and it's really good when communities have gatekeepers that wouldn't allow universities or anybody else to come in there and tell them what to do. And so that's really important to have community knowledge and community partners that are strong. Okay, so there are other ways of, reclaiming and giving community a voice against the harm, as Austin spoke. And one of the biggest harms that are happening right now, there's the harm of racial violence. And this is happening all over the place. And I feel that landscape architects, and many feel, believe it or not, that landscape architects can be key to healing these sites. So as an example is the Tamir Rice Memorial that we're working on, our firm, DesignJones. And just to refresh your memory, which I'm sure I don't have to, Tamir Rice was a 12-year-old child who was playing in a park. Now, this blurry image, which it's blurry on purpose, is where the police came up and just basically shot him in cold blood. I will say it. They just shot him. And there had been a call, which are always these calls from outsiders who called and said, there's somebody with a gun, but the outsider did say, it's on the recording, that it could be a child and it could be a toy, which it was. But the police came and this happened. Unfortunately, there were no charges. I think this policeman went to go to another police, to be a policeman somewhere else. But there was a civil suit. The criminal suit never got to happen. The criminal case was not, no indictment, no grand jury decision, or the grand jury decision, there wasn't going to be a criminal case. And so Tamir Rice's mother founded the Tamir Rice Foundation and wanted to do something on the site. The person in the top is Jamie Schwartzberg, who is a landscape architect in Cleveland. Her firm is called DeRue. So in the bottom, you could see with the orange, that's a butterfly garden that was put there for Tamir's sister. So a couple of things. I mean, so we got involved because when Jamie was asked by the school, the people that did this garden, that Tamir's mother, Samaria Rice, wanted to do a memorial. You could see the square, there's like a square in the top, right behind that bench. That was the pavilion where he had been. And after this happened, she had that pavilion removed because as a mother, she was wounded and didn't want to see anything there, didn't want to see that space. That pavilion right now is in Chicago and is traveling the country as this kind of living memorial, which is cool. But after time, she realized that something has to happen in that space. You know, it just can't be left there. And I want to memorialize him there. And so when they came to Jamie said, recommended us to come in and be the designer. So we're the designer and she's the local architect of record, landscape architect of record. So we're working together. And so when I came and I saw the site, I was actually like floored because when you see the videos are so enclosed. And so you think that he's somewhere very isolated, but he wasn't. He was just a couple of feet, as you could see, from the school. And down there's a huge community center and a big ball field. Go ahead, you could say the name of the community center, Austin. Cadell Community Center, which is a huge community center, neighborhood, everybody uses it. Kids everywhere. And that butterfly garden was done because his sister was there. She saw her brother shot. And she was handcuffed by police and laid handcuffed while her brother died. So, and you don't know that from the video clip. So when I came there, I was just like overwhelmed, believing, how could this happen here? Like, how could he not see that this was a kid? There are kids everywhere that have to witness this. So we were brought in and I saw the site and I, talked to Mrs. Rice, who's totally amazing that she can do this. And, and I got to know like him through her. And these are some sketches that I did. And, the idea was kind of like that thinking there was this butterfly garden there. And I was like, we need to fix it, restore it and keep it, and maybe put a plaque for the sister. And the fact that he was a butterfly, because she said he was playing, he was out playing, he liked to play. And someone else had given him that air pistol. That wasn't something she had bought for him, but it was a toy, but someone had given him that toy gun. And she said he was just out playing. And I thought about the fact that he was a butterfly and that got cut off. So this first image was my hand, my just trace sketch of the butterfly garden morphing into this boy. And that's a piece of corten steel that's jagged, that comes down and hits it's like an imprint in the ground. It hits it and then it disperses into these butterflies. And that hit is like when he was, struck down and cut off. And then the other one I thought was more kind of literal about, as an African-American male, you're in a box. From the minute you're born, you're put in this box, right? And then you are really a butterfly, right? Or something happens to you and you get freed, or that you are a butterfly, right? And then you literally get put in a box, like a coffin. So the idea of butterfly box. So I show this to Mrs. Rice, and she liked the second one. And actually it wasn't that simple a process, because if you go back here, when I met her, she had gotten permission from the lynching memorial and the wonderful landscape architects that did that memorial in Alabama, that lynching memorial, that one of those hanging pieces, they gave her copyright that she could use one of those pieces for this memorial. And I kind of talked her out of it, or said, not really, because I didn't have the, if she wanted to use it, we were going to figure out how you did it. But the thing I kept thinking, that it was really about this landscape and about reclaiming this kind of environment. And this is a place for kids, and that is powerful. And she wanted that because she felt like this was a lynching, and so she wanted that hanging piece. And they had actually, had sketches and drawings, and she had the copyright to use it. But I got her to see that it was a lynching. So somehow to make that point, but it was also about claiming this space and being able to have people come and celebrate the wonderfulness of Tamir, but also the harm that was done to him and other Black children and people that have to experience this collectively. She chose the second one, which was about, using the form of the butterfly in the box. And here's a rendering of, the refurbished butterfly garden, and with the plaque in the middle. And then, as being, a landscape architect, I'm always thinking about water collection. And so how I can incorporate that and really, making this this whole space and kind of environmental thing. So there's a rain garden, or a dry creek actually, that runs from the memorial, the stone that surrounds, it's pretty big, it's like 10 feet wide, that hole. So that surrounds this granite plaque, or granite stone grave really, that runs around, and that stone runs into the butterfly garden, actually the water runs through the dry creek into the butterfly garden to actually water the butterfly garden. And then a path with butterflies kind of etched in it. And then also that X where it goes from bright stone to black stone, marking, the tragedy, and then the grave from this
brightness, as you can see. And then the middle with the granite stone of, Tamir, and some words, memorial words that Miss Rice came up with, and new planting, and then these butterfly inserts, and changing the stone from bright to black. And right now, where the project is the construction documents are done. Everything's really done where we are right now. And we got permission, that's public land.
So we had to go to the historic district, which approved it. We had to go to the city to get them to give her like, you know, forever lease to actually use the land, and they approved it. The holdup right now is this plaque. Because of the, like some of the words and, you know, the devastation caused by this country, you know, the way, and actually these words have been softened. I mean, I work with her there, but, you know, so it's like the city approving these words. So that's where it is now. Once this is approved, I mean, it's already construction documents, cost us, everything's done. Contractors waiting to just get it to put their bids in, all the approval, the land, everything. It's just this plaque that is the, you know, and we're willing to fight. I mean, we're trying to, well, there's a council person that's working with us to get this approved. And it is about facing the truth of these places, you know. And this is the material, the black stone and these slabs and permeable paving. So everything's permeable, you know, really thinking about the environment, really thinking about the fact that there are kids and people around here, but also trying to express the pain. And then this is the final rendering where you see butterfly garden and this dry creek where the stone plaque is higher. So the water goes into there and runs into the butterfly garden. And there's like these kind of culverts that are built under that walkway. And so that kind of fits into the landscape, right? It's kind of like simple, beautiful thing, but you get up to it and you read those words and you realize you see what's happened and you realize it's a grave site, but, you know, kind of encompassing this landscape. So, you know, this is about kind of claiming, you know, claiming the space back and letting communities have power for the wounds that have happened to them. Do you want to add anything, Austin, before we end?
No, I saw a comment in the chat from Doug Williams. He said, "We Chicago have the gazebo at the Stony Island Art Bank Landscape Garden 2016. Visual artist Piastra Gates acquired the gazebo. Fabio Tamir was shot and killed under by police."
Yeah, I mean, that's really wonderful because like she just wanted it gone. She wanted it torn down, but someone, you know, I know it was in Chicago. I mean, she told me that they acquired it. And now she's, you know, because you lose a kid, that's what, you know, she's just in pain. But then she, you know, as many of these mothers, there's a whole collection of them, unfortunately, you know, they realize they have a greater duty. And so she realized, you know, she thought, well, I shouldn't have taken it down, but it did. And luckily they have it in Chicago, but I really need to claim this space, you know, for the people here and to say something. And so.
Yeah, and just to add what you said, hundreds of kids every day walk by this, you know, whether they're going to the art center or they're going to their elementary school.
Yeah, I mean, that was the challenge. And that's how I got her to realize, you know, you can't put this hanging thing there because you got all these kids. But I promised her we can do something really powerful, you know, that doesn't neglect the murder that happened here, but that fits into this landscape and acknowledges that he was a child, and it still should be a place where children should come, and they should, in a way, in a subtle way, in a beautiful way, understand what happened and be able to embrace this place again, you know? So that was kind of the dilemma. And like I said, it's got all the approvals, everything's done. It's just a plaque. We're like, and hopefully the council people can get the permitting and the mayor and people to say, okay, we'll let her keep our words, or if we have to tweak a bit, but anyway. So thank you so much. And I hope we weren't too long so that we have a chance to have a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jones Allen and Dr. Allen, so much for such a wonderful talk. Yeah, we've still got plenty of time for questions if people want to keep popping those into the Zoom Q&A function. But first question, Rachel comments, what an amazing project, the Tamir Rice Memorial. and asks, was this a healing process at all for Tamir's mother? Does his mother see landscape architecture as fitting into the mission and themes of her nonprofit in any way?
Oh, I think she does now. Yes. Luckily, the person that did the butterfly garden is now like really working with her as a part of the foundation. And that person, who's an educator, knew that you needed to do something in that landscape. So they did that butterfly garden. And then that person knew Jamie. She knew the landscape architect. She was aware, the person that's very close and working with her, her name's Molly. And you know, Miss Rice listens to Molly and you know, said, this is, you know, you really need a landscape architect. You know, you don't, you know, even if you have this, you got this permission to have this hanging, you know, piece from the lynching memorial, you still need a landscape architect. And so that was really important that there was someone. And, you know, Miss Rice is very, very bright. And so I was, you know, talking to her and getting her to understand, yeah, and she'd be able to understand, yeah, it's really about the whole place, not just about, you know, this one square where this thing happened. He was in the park. That's where he'd like to go. So yeah, I mean, I think she really, luckily there was someone that she was close to that immediately knew about landscape architecture and knew you needed a landscape architect. You didn't need an architect, which usually what they think of first. You know, you needed a landscape architect. And then, you know, Miss Rice was, you know, after talking to her, you know, immediately, you know, there wasn't like a battle or pushback about, yeah, it's not just about putting this thing, it's about I have to deal with the landscape. And she's been really great. I mean, we talk all the time. Yeah. And she actually does have a building. The foundation has a building, and she's doing other things in that community, you know, to try to use what happened as a way to coalesce the community, bring service to her community, and do, you know, other things by creating places like the building she has, the center she's developing, and really creating places and spaces where kids can be free and be kids. Yeah.
Great to hear that. Diane wonders, after completing a project, what is the length of time which you spend monitoring the sites usually?
Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, in general, or I think usually, I mean, there's some kind of contract that you enter into, you know, in general, you know, in terms of how long you'll monitor something. But we tend to, you know, kind of put a little bit of ownership in terms of projects, and, you know, and tell our, you know, we feel like it's, you know, in place and everybody's okay. If that's 2 years, if that's 5 years, I mean, there's, you know, things that I know that we've worked on and we're talking to people. The thing with the Gentili project, the Nora Cap project, community, you know, application project, the people are supposed to take immediate ownership of it. I get phone calls all the time, and that's okay, you know, because they're real questions on what do you do if this happens? You know, can you come take a look at this? It's one of the reasons why a lot of people are a lot more hesitant to get into residential work, because what happens is somebody's looking at this every day in a personal ownership way, and they can see the variations. And if, you know, it reassures when you can explain what happened, or you know, do the due diligence and go take a look and figure out if something went wrong, you know, how can we, you know, make it right? Or
Yeah, I just wanted to say, to answer that question, my answer would be we monitor TIF forever, because because of the kind of work we do, right? So you could see they're like really kind of community-based, immersed kind of work. And we actually become friends with people. And oftentimes we're doing stuff pro bono or with students or grassroots, till it becomes a project, or even if we're doing it through the firm where, we're being hired and getting paid. They're usually the kind of projects where, we have relationships with these people, either from the beginning or through the process, that it happens forever. And landscape architecture, it's never finished. I tell my students that it's never finished, right? Because landscapes grow, right? And they change. And then in the real world, things happen. We have construction documents, and things were supposed to break ground, and then it didn't happen, and some political thing happened, and now it's all different. And so you kind of end up kind of committing to these kind of things for a long time. And actually, that's kind of what it takes, because communities want to trust you and know that you're going to be there for them. I mean, when Austin was doing NORCAP, he had to go to these people's houses. I mean, he was in their houses, having a lot of it started before Katrina, having some gumbo and talking, and you just kind of get to know, like with Miss Rice, it's like I had to gain her trust. I had to sit from her across the table, because this was, this is her child that, and I was an outsider, not from Cleveland, she didn't know me from anybody. It's Daru who knew us, because he knew Austin, because Austin lived in Cleveland. It was at Cleveland State for a long time. And so they knew of Austin and the kind of work he did. So that firm brought us in, but we had to gain her trust, because we were brought in as to design this. So when you have those kind of projects, and just landscape architecture in general, even if you're not getting paid, yes, technically there's construction administration, or there's, a maintenance manual, or there's a period afterwards, technically that you're getting paid for. But if you really care about the work and the community and the understanding, you're kind of committed forever, especially in this kind of work.
Okay. So the next is
Actually not a question, but a statement from Letitia, and they say that they're very honored to hear your stories and how you are so involved. And in lectures like these, we can realize how much we don't take into consideration, whether it's within smaller communities that are pushed aside, and communities that no one wants to talk about. They're from Nevada, and a lot of this area is working with indigenous tribes in rural communities, and they're really grateful to see how far landscape architecture can stretch.
Yeah, I mean, it's not glamorous. I'll just say that, we're not getting the big highline or the glamorous work. We get a lot of work, but that's kind of work. But we like doing that, because it's really, like I said, it's not glamorous. It's probably not going to win a bunch of awards, but when we feel like we've changed people's lives, we've made political statements, we've empowered communities. Even if it's, as somebody told me, well, Diane, you do those little postage stamp projects. So I'm like, yeah, I might be doing a postage stamp, but if my postage stamp empowers some community and gives them, either in terms of environmental protection or understanding, or, helps them stabilize their community, I'm fine with that,
It's a great attitude. So next question, Doug asks, with the access to the lynching steel memorial element, could some other way of using it have been incorporated to fit a more hopeful meaning and metaphor, or does it have to be displayed in the same way as the memorial in the South? He was thinking, what a unique opportunity to connect the history to today, or maybe in the future, perhaps?
You can, Austin can answer, because Austin immediately said, yeah, maybe it shouldn't be there where those kids are, but she has a whole nother building.
Yeah, absolutely.
She owns, where the land is private, and she could, and it has, a lot, it's a building on a space, but she owns it all. So she really wouldn't have to get permission, and it could be part of that. But go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, and from a landscape architecture standpoint, I think it's scale, too. Those entities, they're huge, and need that breathing space to even, this is what we're talking about. And as her center, which is in another part of town, becomes much more known and has its own programmatic things, I think it becomes key in that way. And I think the two sites actually will begin to talk to each other. Like, people will come to events at the other site and know that part of the ritual is they have to go to the memorial, you know, and vice versa. The children that see this memorial all the time will know about the programming at the other sites that goes into another realm. That's my
Yeah, I mean, honestly, too, I think, and I was thinking this when I was talking to her and got her, I think it was political too. I mean, like I said, we had to go and get this design approved by the city and approved by the historic preservation, because that is private land that had to be, you know, her allowed to use it to do this.
Yeah.
And I think it would have, I mean, it's public land, not private land. It's public
Yeah.
land. It's not like that, you know, it's public land and it had to go through city permission. And there's politics, like there's a memorial for policemen that are not that far. And, you know, it's a kind of very diverse community and you have a school there. So I really do think it would have been hard to get, I think you would have had more uproar about the, that, putting that there. I mean, when we showed the design that got chosen, they loved it. They loved it mainly because, you know, well, they said it was beautiful and that they said it's a subtle statement, right? Where, you know, hanging that thing, I agree with her. It would have been powerful, but I, like Austin said, I didn't think it was the scale. And I also thought realistically, and you have to do with the realism of when you're doing landscape architecture, especially this kind of in public work, there are all kinds of zoning and rules and other people who control things. And realistically, I just kept thinking, they are not going to approve this lynching thing this close to this school and community and the policeman's memorial, which is, you know, over across, you know, there is, you know, and I did feel like it was not, you know, she needed something powerful, but that encompassed the landscape as opposed to, you know, putting that on a pedestal and figuring out how to circulate around it or whatever. Yeah, and I just think it would have, politically, it would have been harder to get that through because it wasn't her property, you know, it's public property. And now they're embracing it. She has all the permissions. It's just approval of that plaque. It's really approval of the words. It's not the plaque because they've approved the whole design. It's approval of the words on the plaque, which is kind of, it's stuck somewhere because somewhere somebody's in a little uproar about what she said. But hopefully we can get that through with help of the council person.
Okay, great. And shifting now to New Orleans, someone asks, in New Orleans, how many homes do you hope to include in the project? And also, do you know yet what the results are in terms of gallons of water kept out of the stormwater system?
We did about 30, and we've kind of cut at that in terms of our role. And we were subbed with another engineering firm that decided, okay, we would do this much and off, and they have enough money that they're probably going to do another 100 homes, I think, out of the.
Yeah, I think they've done 100.
They've done 100, and I
30,
think they're going to do 100 more.
Other landscape architects did 30 or 60, right? Or I guess 70. So there've been 100 done because there were several teams. And so yes, but we did 30 of them. And our 30 are they all installed?
Yes.
Maybe we're still, yeah, our 30 are all complete, which is great. And what's happening is until it's like we have been calculating, it was required that you calculate how much stormwater, you know, how much water you're collecting, how much impermeable space, because when it's all finished, they're going to add all that together and determine how much, what size facility you would have had to have. And I can bet you that it would have been a facility that they wouldn't have been able to build, you know, to get the equal amount, really. You know, I mean, that's what I'm thinking, just by, like, we have looked at how much we've collected totally, because our last one, yeah, was just completed, but they're waiting till they're all done because it is a pilot project, and then they'll add all that together, and then they can determine the capacity of what one facility would have had to be. And they probably wouldn't have been able to find a place to put it. I mean, there's a big golf course there. They would have had to take up the whole golf course to put it there, or the park. And then there's an Southern University in New Orleans. There's an HBCU. There's a college campus there. And there's UNO. So they probably would have had to take up a lot of open space that's being used for many things in order to put that facility. I can't say for sure because, as Austin said, it's not finished yet. There were about, like I said, 400 people. They've done 100. They just celebrated having done 100. They just had, it was an article in the newspaper about it, that they've just done 100 homes.
Yeah.
So
It was actually, they were expecting about 50 to 100 people to show up, and it was 500.
oh, 500, excuse me.
Yeah, that came
Yeah.
that.
Because they kept thinking, people aren't gonna want to put this on their property, because $25,000, but it's not $25,000 to, decorate your house or what. It was to do green stormwater infrastructure, right? So to do a GSI on your property. And so they figured, we'll probably just get a few people. Well, yeah, they got 500 people.
Yeah.
So they celebrated doing 100. I mean, 100 of these things have been done, and we're really proud that we did 30 of them. And then Dana Brown and Associates, and I'm not sure the other landscape architect, but so there were several landscape architects, but we got to do a big chunk. Yeah.
That's amazing. So someone asks, in your experience, how can we as landscape architects work to convince cities and politicians and decision makers as well to invest resources in disinvested neighborhoods as an alternative to the higher profile projects? And also wondering if there are any cities in the US that are doing this well.
Oh, yeah, I mean, a lot of cities are thinking that way now. Detroit, Chicago, New Orleans is rethinking that because of Baltimore. And it's because we're actually doing a project in Baltimore. And it's because, okay, with politicians, you have to, they want to be reelected. So them realizing that their constituency, will be, and having people understand, communities understand that they have power, right? Right, their vote really is power, although there's, on the local level, their vote is power for their council people and their mayor, right? And so, especially council people, they want to be reelected. And so communities realizing, that's why I always say, start at the grassroots. Communities need to, utilize their council people. Often communities forget about their council people and say, why isn't the mayor, get your council person on board, and then he'll talk to the mayor because your council person wants to be re-elected. And then also, cities think about tax bases and money. I hate to say this, but everything kind of revolves. So you have to think about, okay, how can we show that this will save money? This will make money. This will keep people who want to be in power, that if you give communities power, that will create money in the communities and, a better tax base, community investment trust and all these kind of, so that's what you have to do. And landscape architects more and more be called to be a part of this. And many landscape architects are working on the ground. We had a conference at Open City Symposium at our at UT Arlington on Friday, and Sarah Zodi, and then these wonderful landscape architect professors out of the University of San Diego who are working on the more border, just looking at, they're doing these kind of community collaborative centers. So a lot of communities and a lot of landscape architects are finally, people are realizing that landscape architects, it's about land, right? As in Austin's film was saying, it's about who controls the land. And so then communities are realizing, buildings are fine, but we got to control the land, and who knows about the land. And more landscape architects are not afraid of politics, right? They're not afraid of realizing, it's about, I got a person, I got to help the community organize, in order to get these projects, these projects about preserving land, helping with the environment, getting people to control things, So I think there are many examples. And like I said, Sarah Zodi is doing a couple of projects like that. And I can name other landscape architects that are, realizing their capacity, and more cities and communities are, instead of thinking of architects, which they had been, are now thinking landscape architect. Yeah.
One of the big ones, of course, was in Texas here in February with the crisis that happened. It wasn't that it just got cold and snowed, it was the collapse of the energy system, or the almost collapse of the electrical energy and water. And both things collapsed simultaneously for a lot of people for 3-4 days. And, people were doing innovations like melting snow just so that they could use the sanitary facilities within their house. It was quite phenomenal. And people ended up with electric bills of $3,000 a month all of a sudden, when they had been paying $30, $40 a month, and I just put them in crisis mode. So these cities have really had to rethink the deals that they've struck. A lot of things are in that kind of disruptive state. And that's why I even reference back to when LaBash was formed. LaBash was formed, as a way of saying, hey, we as students, we need more. And I think these communities are doing the same thing, and they're putting the demand back on the profession. Doesn't mean we're the only ones. I think a question was asked Kofi on Friday, which was real important. Somebody was saying, how do we take the lead? It's how do we organize the table where we really get the people at the table, to move these issues forward, including political issues that need to be in sync with landscaping.
And a landscape architect can really change the focus, because for instance, in Joppa, the person, Kate Holliday, is an architect. She's an architectural historian. And so she was looking at community and, looking at these settlements historically, and started focusing on this school, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and then she brought in another architect. But when Austin and I got involved, Austin actually got the community started thinking about the fact that you're on these 3 lakes, and then looking at the history, you own these 3 lakes, just kind of changing, making them realize, oh my goodness, we didn't know we owned the lakes. And we didn't even know what that was. We didn't understand the power, of having these lakes, right? And how it connects to the Trinity River, and that we can kind of have an impact on the development and the desire, because that belongs to the community. And because Austin found out that really was theirs. And they had no idea, because they were focused on the school building and the housing and not the landscape. And now that they realize they own these lakes, it's just kind of impacting everything. Like, how are they going to treat the school and the housing and the landscape, and the fact that they own these lakes and people have to travel through there and they're connected to the Trinity River. So a landscape architect can, in concert with architects, a team can really shift, and get people to think about the land and the greater, power that they have, as opposed to thinking of building to building, or focusing on, just this one, thinking about the bigger picture.
Absolutely. We still have a few minutes for questions, if there are any last minute questions that people would like to pop into the Q&A. So I'll give that a minute, but yeah.
We can always talk more on each. The other Dr. Allen asked me, she knows if I can take 5 minutes to tell you a 2-minute story, I'm gonna take 10. So.
Brilliant. He has a lot of, we only have an hour. It'll be just be a Frederick Law Olmsted. Okay.
Well, you've timed it pretty perfectly, I will say.
But if anybody wants to know the history of Frederick Law Olmsted, the real history, that's your man. Talk to Austin Allen. Is anybody doing it?
Or a history. There's so many histories.
Or anybody put him on your committee on Olmsted.
Great. Well, I might say that we call this, and thank you both so much for such a powerful and wonderful talk. A last question. Great. What documentaries are you hoping to work on in the future?
I was talking last night about it. There's a couple of them. One is with Brenda Marie Osby, who people saw in the film. She was poet laureate in New Orleans, and in Louisiana, she was the poet laureate and has been doing tremendous work. I love using her as a reviewer in studios because she gets our profession a lot in terms of understanding us in the urban environment. Anyway, she has this poem called Suicide City, and she and I talked about turning it into a short film. And it's about New Orleans. It's layered and complex as you can imagine. So that's one of them. And then there's a Houston story I want to tell with a friend of mine from Houston.
So I'll add some controversy here, which I love to do. So I've been badgering Austin. He doesn't listen to me. That Austin has a bunch of footage that nobody else has, and a heck of a story about really what happened in Katrina. Because Austin came there in 2005. You know, he ended up working with Megan Wright and Laura Ninth Ward, being there at LSU, and he had all this footage. And he said he came there to do a documentary, but then he stopped because he decided to get involved in the community, right? And ended up living there. but he has all this footage that no one else has from, you know, right after the storm, when the city was like, nobody was there up until today, because he's always filming stuff, right? And, you know, I really think that, you know, I love Spike Lee, but I think that documentary that he did was done too soon, because so much has happened so after. And I don't think anyone's really done the definitive, like the long-term 10-year look at what happened from the storm till 10 years after Katrina, the real. And he has the footage and the interviews, but he just lets it sit. And every time I say, you really need to do the real Katrina story, and he just says, leave me alone. I'm going to do a poet or something. But anyway, so that's what I think you should do, because he has.
I actually have been talking with some former students about them that playing a much more important role because they shot a lot of it and said here. And
the real story was not told because those documentaries were done too soon after Katrina.
Too soon. Yeah. And they tell
We're
you.
talking to Austin, you know, because of who he is, he can talk to the person on the street corner, and then, you know, the person in the government and everybody in between, you know. He's the nice one, so people talk to him. So, so he really should do that documentary. But anyway.
Or work with him. So. I hear you. There was a gentleman I remember stopping him on the street. And every time I take students down in the 06, really, to New Orleans, we always see in the paper, as soon as we get there, and I'm telling everybody it's cool, in the paper it'd be like they found another dead body in the lower Ninth Ward from the flood. And you know, it's just, God, this just happens so often. But it was before that. In the end of 05, I remember just running into this guy on the street. It was like dusk in the lower Ninth Ward, and it was just me and him. And we started talking. It turned out he worked in the coroner's office, and, you know, and he gets into this dialogue about dead bodies. And he was like, it's probably about 300 more dead bodies in there that we haven't found. Nobody's talked about. And then he explains it to me. You know, it's those kind of conversations, and you're like,
yes. And Spike
whoa.
did not have
yeah. Really heart-wrenching, you know, kinds of things that make you understand infrastructure and landscape better, and thinking clearer about recovery and resilience.
Sounds like a pretty incredible archive that you've built also. I think you've gotten a lot of support in the chat and the Q&A from people who want to see your movie, and some shout outs from New Orleans also. So we only have 3 more minutes and then I think we're gonna have to move, but first of all, someone would love to hear your perspective on Frederick Law Olmsted. So maybe you have to make a documentary about him also.
He started it, but he hasn't finished it.
Right, obviously. And Doug wonders for Dr. Jones Allen, what is on the horizon for your future research?
Oh, so I'm going to be doing, next year I'm going to be at Dunbar and Oaks. I got a year's fellowship. So I'm going to be at Dunbar and Oaks working on my book. So hopefully it'll come out after I'll spend the year writing, finishing the research and writing. So it's going to be called The Maroon Landscape Approach to Coastal Resiliency. So I'm going to be looking at, the maroon slaves and, how they lived and how you can use those as an example to deal with coastal resiliency. And I've interviewed, and I'm going to be interviewed some people who are actually doing real projects, current projects today on coastal projects and, trying to connect them with, like what is the philosophy they're using. And, people I think that kind of connect with that same kind of indigenous knowledge, but are doing real current projects. So that's what I'm working on now. And a couple of other projects for the firm, but actually in terms of my, scholarly research is to finish this book. And I feel really lucky that I was able to get a year at Dunbar and Oaks to just get up every day and write and research.
Yeah, I think we're all looking forward to reading it. And again, thank you so much for this conversation and this presentation. We're gonna have to wrap up because the next Zoom session is actually the closing ceremony. So hope to see you all there, and thank you all so much for attending as well. And thank you once again to Dr. Allen and Dr. Jones Allen.
Thank you.
So yeah.
You guys are great. You're the future. Bye.